I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. You surviving?
Just about, yeah.
Just
Everything's a bit
about only.
crazy.
Well, let me try and see if I can get this positioned a little better.
Okay.
Da-da, da-da. Whoops, not quite. This is sort of a makeshift setup I have here.
Oh, I'm the same. I have all my school books as my tripod, so.
Piled up as your tripod. There you go. Yeah, it's better.
Yay!
Let me get. I can maybe even get it a little better. Hang on. Wow, what an exercise. We're all learning.
Absolutely.
That's better. There.
That's perfect.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Cool.
So how is it all on your side of the ocean?
Well, it's crazy here because we have this orange menace who is messing everything up.
Yeah, I don't know what is it about Ireland, but I think we're kind of obsessed with him in a sense as well. Like,
Well, everybody
Irish
is.
Twitter is crazy about him.
Well, it should be.
So
He's
I
a
suppose,
source. If he weren't so dangerous, he'd be a source of great entertainment. But
absolutely.
unfortunately, everything he does has negative consequences.
Yeah, and I think like that's what's so crazy about it because it can be almost so it can almost seem so not real at times
Yeah,
that I suppose we can find it comedic, but then you actually, reality hits that, wow, like he actually is the president of the United States of America. And, you can't really say it without kind of smirking or smiling. But like
I know.
what he's saying, even at the moment, leaving out everything else he's ever said, is just crazy.
Well, it's obviously very complicated, but it's a shame to see the leader of our nation attacking governors and attacking reporters, and we really need a calmer, more focused leadership, and I think the world needs a more focused kind of leadership right now.
Yeah.
But everybody is fighting it and working hard. What amazes me is, I don't know if this is true in Ireland. I'm sure it is, actually. Everybody is taking this pretty seriously. There's obviously a small minority that are out there who are chafing and publicly protesting, but I think most people understand the nature of this virus is really pernicious. I mean, we don't know everything about it. And what we do know is that you can go from being well and suddenly feel sick and a day later be in a coma and a day later be gone. And I think that the way it behaves differently in different people is what is upsetting a lot of the epidemiologists and critical care doctors. My daughter among them. My daughter is a critical care doctor in the ICU at the Mass General during her shifts, and it's pretty stark. It's tough stuff.
Yeah, and like you said, I think most people, strong majority, are taking everything so seriously. And I think in Ireland, because we're such a small country and small population, and everyone, we joke that, you could go on a blind date and you could be meeting your cousin. Like, everyone knows each other so well. We're all, you could meet someone in Dublin and you could be linked through a friend or a family member or something like that. But what's crazy about it is that, I suppose, for us, that every death, unfortunately, the whole community knows, like the whole almost region, and I suppose like not almost state but county for us, like, and everyone knows that person and they were part of the community, and they added so much value, especially in rural communities, which is where I suppose a lot of the elderly people now in here were having massive problems with homes where the elderly are situated, and there's been outbreaks in these homes, which is obviously detrimental. Like, it's just spreading like wildfire within the homes because obviously the carers are in and out during the day and trying to look after their families as well in a kind of normal sense. So it's very sad here because you go onto Facebook and there's numbers, but in a country like this we know the people behind the numbers personally, and everything they've added. It's just it's very sad. And in fairness to our government and our leaders, they've done a very, very good job.
Good for them. Good for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's,
Yeah.
all right,
How's your testing? You guys have really good in-depth testing readily available?
I think there was a process where we were sending some testing away to Germany, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But and then there was also there's a bit of a turnaround with testing, like when you get tested and when you get it back. But I think the biggest thing here is just having the testing kits and the equipment and the facilities to do it, really, which they put out the government put out kind of an ask of the people to rejoin the nurses, rejoin the doctors, rejoin all these the people who need to be providing these services. And there was a massive comeback, people coming out of retirement, people coming back from Australia, students who were coming, this was obviously a good while ago. Students came back from Australia, left their lives there. Obviously, they left maybe a couple of years ago during economic downturn or whatever. And it was just, I don't mean to say it's an Irish thing, because I'm sure there's plenty of countries who people have come back into the workforce. But there's just something about, I just think something about when something like this, even in a smaller scale, in a community sense, happens, something terrible happens to a family or a person, there's a real sense of, community, and don't even worry about that, I'll do it for you, and I'll go and get your shopping. And it's just a really nice sense of community. And there's obviously so many negative negative impacts from the coronavirus, and people dying is only one of them. But I've also seen people realizing that money and time actually isn't what we should revolve our lives around, almost. And I suppose at this point, money, well, I suppose in Ireland, in terms of money, I mean that we had a 2-tier health system where the public health system was suffering detrimentally. There was 10,000 people on hospital beds on waiting lists, and because of the private sector, essentially. And what's happened is they've just merged the two now. There's essentially, it's 1-tier system now during the pandemic. And I suppose what people are realizing, wow, like, this can be done. So many things are happening so fast. It's like, oh, they can be done now because there's an emergency. And I suppose for people like us, when we see things like climate change and we understand, the real effects that climate change have had on people's lives and will have, it's kind of frustrating as well, in a sense, for me anyway.
Well, no, listen, I think you're speaking for millions of people around the world who are finding, it's opening doors and windows for people. It's reminds everybody about the fragility of life. It reminds everybody about the importance of science and facts and responsibility in public life. Over here, we had this blind sort of ideological refusal to accept the idea. So, we've heard from our president that coronavirus is a Chinese hoax, well, excuse me, it was a Democratic hoax at first here. Climate crisis is the Chinese hoax. But either way, it's a hoax. And obviously we've paid a high price for that. I mean, we didn't do the shelter in home as early as we should have, needless to say. But recriminations right now is not going to take us where we need to go. What we need to do right now is be really thoughtful and learn the lesson immediately about heeding science and facts and evidence. And there is a basic truth. 2 and 2 is 4. And no matter how much you argue, you're not going to make it 5. But that's what's going on with climate change. People are trying to make the climate crisis the equivalent of 2 and 2 is 5, and it doesn't work. But they do it anyway. And we don't have time for that anymore. We're urgently behind. And I think about the connections between coronavirus and pandemic and climate crisis are very real, beginning with this willingness of people to just deny it, to ignore it. I mean, people didn't want to accept the science and prepare, and they don't want to accept the science of climate crisis and prepare. And so hopefully this is going to break down some of those walls that have existed in the marketplace of ideas, in the political marketplace. And my hope is that people are going to wake up. I mean, before coronavirus, Alicia, that's just a couple months ago, obviously, a few months ago, every nation in the world was going up in its emissions. So the US, we were going up. China was going up. India going up. Europe going up. And so nobody was meeting their Paris Agreement targets, which is just not acceptable, because the scientists, obviously, and you know this well, warned us 3 years ago. We have 12 years to make the decisions that will prevent the worst consequences of the climate crisis. Those decisions have not been made. In fact, worse, our president pulled out of the Paris Agreement, the only president in the world who made a decision to get out of it. And that resulted in other nations that we worked very hard when I was negotiating the Paris Agreement. We had to work really hard to get certain countries to take part. They didn't want to. There were a bunch of reluctant nations. So they did take part, and we were building momentum, real momentum, up in this January at the World Economic Forum, not the usual location for major climate engagement, but the World Economic Forum business leaders were deeply engaged in and committed to actions with respect to climate. So all of a sudden, we're now confronting the sort of a double pandemic, the pandemic of the actual presence of what's happened on coronavirus and the pandemic coming at us with climate crisis. And we're going to have more refugees, more climate refugees, more diseases spread more easily, more intensity to storms, more sea level rise. I mean, everything is going to be more on the negative side. And the truth is, if we were doing what's available to us, the positive side offers incredible benefits, good jobs, better jobs. The fastest growing job in America before this hit was solar power technician. Second fastest growing job in America, wind turbine technician. And we were moving in a direction where momentum was building and solar power was cheaper than coal. But we've got to hold on to that momentum. We got to recreate it. Tomorrow, being the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, is the perfect time for people to say, okay, I'm going to commit over the next months. We're going to make the difference. We're going to build support. We're going to create a monumental global movement that demands accountability from so-called political leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said about the momentum as well, like I've had so many people talking to me, and I actually think it's such a weird time to be, an environmentalist or someone who advocates for climate action, because there's obviously a drop in carbon emissions now and air pollution and things like this, but it's such a short term, I suppose, happening. Like it's not going to last, and if anything, it won't make any difference to the amount of pollution and the amount of carbon emissions that have happened over the last hundreds, thousands of years. And this is the thing, it's like this is what we need to do. This is how crazy the situation is in terms of how much carbon we actually produce and how we are affecting our climate. And there's loads of different examples, like different rivers clearing up and different mountains being able to be seen and different things like that, and they're just like the ones you can see. So imagine what is happening in the ocean and in different, I suppose, ecosystems around the world that we can't see.
It's a moment. It's like an oasis. It's a moment it's a moment of resuscitation. It's also a moment of education, because a lot of people for the first time are getting to see these things and saying, wow, it's possible.
Yeah.
But we don't want to do it this way, obviously, but it shows what can happen. I think you're going to see countless references to the, I mean, I was reading an article about how in Venice, because all the boats aren't churning through the canals, you
Yeah.
can actually see down into the canal.
Yeah.
And in many parts of the world, people are actually looking and seeing blue sky on a sustained basis for the first time in ages and ages. There's
And
just no pollution on the horizon. It's terrific.
and I think as well, it's like you said, it's like a window of opportunity to look at what can happen if we actually, made the changes that needed to be made. And it's not about shutting down everything. It's not the same. It wouldn't be done in the same way, obviously. Like, it couldn't be physically, would never be possible. But there are so many things that, like, you and myself and Greta and so many other people around the world have been advocating for, that would make the same thing happen, essentially, in terms of, changing our carbon output and clearing rivers and clearing everything else. It's like, it can be done, and emergency policies and legislation and everything and can actually be done as well. So why is it so hard? And if anything, it's frustrated me so much, because it's, you get told, oh, things can't be done that fast. People will need to be transitioned into it. And yeah, of course, people will need to be transitioned into it. But, we had no choice in the case of COVID-19. We had to do things extremely fast, which, I'm not trying to make it sound like a positive thing, because it's absolutely not. But I'm just looking at the problem and COVID-19 objectively of what has happened, and it is obviously a negative thing. But we've had to, do things at a faster pace. And someone said to me, I was explaining this frustration to a friend, and they said it's like someone who's a smoker all their life. They don't see down the road what's going to happen. And they've said that's like climate change. We keep doing it. We don't see down the road, like, this will inevitably probably lead to your death, But it's like, if you're, we're so concerned then about, car crashes and things like that happening at a faster pace because it's short term. But, like, why is it so hard for us as people to look further than 30, 40 years? I just think that's a mental block.
Well, it's a matter of leadership. I'm wrestling with, I have a beast here. I don't know. See, I'm visiting. He says, why aren't you paying attention to me?
Oh, there you are. We got you.
Disruption, a dog disruption. Anyway.
You're fine.
No, you're totally, you're just totally on point. You're totally correct about it. We can transition. We have to transition, obviously. You can't do it overnight. It's going to take X number of years. But the main point is, we're not making the fundamental decisions that put us on the track to make that kind of a transition. Everybody says, well, the marketplace is going to do it. Let the marketplace work. It's going to catch up. And the problem is that the feedback loops of Mother Nature are coming back at us at a pace. For instance, methane. Permafrost is melting. The tundra is thawing. So the result is we're seeing increased levels of methane being released, which has been trapped for 40,000 years or whatever. And methane is 20 times more damaging than CO2. And it's shorter lived, but it lives long enough within the time span we have left to do extraordinary damage. So that's a feedback loop. Or the oceans. We met at an oceans conference, and there's an extraordinary amount of damage taking place with the combination of pollution, acidification, overfishing, the lack of regulation and enforcement on the oceans. It's an ecosystem, and people are not respecting it as that kind of a system. So we have to give it time and ability to be able to resuscitate. And it's obviously a transitional period, but we've got to make key decisions about electrification. How do we produce our electric power? It's got to be decarbonized. Our transportation has to be decarbonized. We have options. Electric is growing in its battery capacity significantly, very comfortable cars, lots of options now. We ought to be exciting the purchase of those vehicles. Even if it took a subsidy or a tax credit or whatever it is, we need to help the companies to push the curve of production transition. And we ought to call the manufacturers of automobiles in and get them to be part of the team that says, you know what, we're going to speed up. We're just not going to sell these internal combustion engines as many as we were. And here's our target for transition. Now, most of them, the responsible ones, have already said, well, by 2045, 2050, they could do it faster. We could do, you know, a 50% transition by 2030, for instance, and then set a 2030s goal for when we make the full transition rather than waiting till 2050. Buildings, the buildings everybody lives in and works in, all of them are the lowest hanging fruit of gaining in terms of climate, because we could do retrofitting. It's something that where people can't afford it, we could help make programs available that help them to do it. I mean, there are all kinds of different techniques for making these things happen, but there's no concerted global trading of ideas and acceptance of these steps. And my hope is at Glasgow next year, the meeting was postponed from December of this year, end of November, December. We need to now accelerate everybody's commitment to make that transition happen on a clearer schedule. And we've got to enlist the private sector to be part of that solution.
Yeah, I agree. And like you were saying about the different sectors in the marketplace as well. And I think, you know, I was saying earlier about Ireland being a small country and agriculture is our biggest polluter. And the hardest thing about that is that agriculture is as well probably our biggest economic driver. So like our farmers, who are all of my neighbours, you know, I live practically in a field that was bought from a farmer, you know. So, and like I said about the communities and everything, and that's why I think maybe it's a similar situation in certain communities worldwide, or maybe it's an overarching problem with agriculture being viewed as a problem in terms of climate change. But it's so hard because people will point fingers at farmers and different sectors. Oh, it's your fault, you do this. And like you said about the collective effort, there's nobody coming together and there's no support for the people. Like nobody expects that agriculture, you know, we don't want to wake up some morning and press a big red button that just stops agriculture. Like, do you know what I mean? I think it's viewed as if we all want to stop that. I just know in Ireland that's probably one of our biggest problems we have to overcome.
But there are lots of ways. I mean, there are lots of ways. There are lots of ways to begin to do these things in a sustainable way. I mean, regenerative agriculture now has many, many advocates. Shifting crops in different fields, changing your agricultural routines, even the problem of methane, which is more significant than people think from animals, particularly from cattle. You know, I think that even that people are working on different ways to manage it. I'm told there are experiments with a new seaweed. I think it's asparagosa or something like that, which reduces flatulence in cows and reduces methane. And people laugh about it or joke about it sometimes, but the reality is it's a significant contributor. And when you look at the churning of the earth and the destruction of forests in Amazon and other places, it has a profound negative impact on the overall mix of contributing factors to the climate crisis. All of it can be managed. Nobody's saying we can't do it. We're obviously we've got to grow food, but look at the numbers of people all around the world who now are organic in their growing practices. And they practice a very competent, regenerative approach to agriculture, which we need desperately. And there are certain belts on the planet where we have a capacity to have great agriculture. We need to be nurturing it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just like I said, here in Ireland, it's one of the things that there needs to be a real coming together to, you know, support the transition and put in the solutions, and also like things like you said, like grants and subsidies to help people to do that. And I suppose for you, for World War Zero, not just particularly for agriculture, but for, I suppose, for the entire climate change fight, you're trying to get people who wouldn't necessarily be together to fight for this, or to fight for anything really, but they're all coming together to fight for kind of climate action.
Well, that's what World War Zero is about. And thank you, Alicia. You were one of the early founders, the early influencers. You and some of your friends who are part of Climate Strike and Sunrise Movement, Extinction Rebellion. I mean, we need everybody engaged in this. The theory of World War Zero is that the whole world has got to be involved in this. If we're not, we can't get it done. No one country can solve the problem of the climate crisis. Number two, a war. Well, the fact is that some elements of our societies have chosen to declare war on science, war on facts. They are fighting it, and they spend literally billions of dollars, certainly in America, to distort the truth, to create doubt in people's minds. And you can see that in the whole climate debate. And there are memos that lawyers have gotten a hold of in the course of lawsuits, documents that show that people knew that the greenhouse gas effect was real. People knew they were polluting. People knew they were going to be doing this damage, and they went ahead and did it anyway because they wanted to sell their product. So the fact that there's a certain amount of cynicism as a result of these kinds of activities among some corporate entities should not be a surprise to anybody. But now you see a lot of responsible companies stepping up. And there's a new generation of CEOs who are absolutely seized by the issue of climate crisis, many of them dedicating major initiatives in their companies to be able to try to be proactive and to be leaders. And there's a new debate taking place in the world of finance about stakeholder interest versus shareholder interest. And you now see CEOs talking about the corporate responsibility, not just to make money for the shareholders, but to be responsible to the interests of all the stakeholders. And that includes their children and their grandchildren. They are stakeholders in planet Earth. And it's critical for us to have responsible leadership now that's defending the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think here at We the Planet as well, it's the similar sort of, you know, grassroots initiative to try and get people from, you know, different places around the world to come together. And I suppose this is the first initiative that we're doing, the Earth Day, where we're asking people to, you know, talk about one personal change and one systemic change that you'd like to see, you know, in terms of climate solutions. And it's like you said, it's about bringing people together, like not dividing because of this issue. And like you said about, I suppose, the problems with people, you know, amending the truth and fixing it and changing it for what suits them. I suppose the hardest thing, and I think Greta has definitely faced it, is, you know, people on the absolute other side of the fence. Like, we're obviously on this side, and there's people on the fence who, you know, you can try and educate and help them, to guide them and to understand what's actually happening. There's people so far on the other side of the fence. I think that's what's really been the biggest issue in the last year, trying to overcome, you know, that all that fake news, the fake articles, you know, people twisting the truth, and people, I suppose, looking down on not only Greta, like, but loads of other activists as well. I mean, I myself have gotten slack for talking about climate change and taking, you know, striking even. I mean, I got messages like, what's striking going to do? And, you know, things like that, I suppose.
Well, you have to get people to wake up. It's a balance. I remember, I mean, I'm old enough to have been part of the efforts of the 1960s when we had a civil rights movement and a women's movement, environment movement, peace movement. And when I came back from fighting in the war in Vietnam, I stood up and first was involved in Earth Day, 1970, And then I became involved helping to lead the veterans against the war and protest. And yeah, the reason you do it is you have to get people's attention. You have to get people to stop and listen to the other side or the other point of view. Otherwise, a lot of people just go blindly on listening to the conventional wisdom, and conventional wisdom is often either not correct or co-opted and representative of powerful interests that are against doing the kinds of things you need to do. The truth is sometimes hard to come by because you have to fight for it in certain quarters. That's something we've learned many, many times. But the bottom line is, if you're constructive, you can take that strike or take that protest and translate it into a political movement that holds people accountable. That's what we did, Alicia, with the first Earth Day. In the first Earth Day, 1970, we brought 20 million Americans out of their homes who were protesting dirty air, dirty water, contamination of dumps and toxic sites, and they were fighting against their kids getting cancer or against their, being poisoned by arsenic when they drank water or so forth. So that translated into a political movement that focused on elections, and it held the politicians accountable. It defeated 7 of 12 targeted members of Congress. And the minute the 7 lost, the survivors all said, whoa, this is a voting issue. I better pay attention to this. And then we passed in America the Clean Air Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, a Coastal Zone Management Act, and we created the Environmental Protection Agency of our nation. We didn't even have one until 1970, 72. So the result is that's how you make a difference. The great changes in all through history have really come about because powerful people suddenly realized the jig was up, people demanded it, or the people just, in some cases, took over and made the change happen. So it's important for elected leaders to understand, you got to listen to the people. And the people, the majority of the people, clearly are deeply concerned about the climate crisis and know that we can solve the problem and want to get it solved. And I think they're going to hold politicians accountable. In Europe, here, around the world, there's a growing movement of passionate, dedicated people committed to getting this job done.
Absolutely, and I think that's probably a nice note to finish on, that we're all trying
I hope a lot of people, I hope the note I want to finish on, I hope a lot of people will go to your website, to our website, to worldwarzero.com. Worldwarzero.com, it's global. We're starting to build it up, and we need, as I said just now, make it a voting issue. Make it something people need to respond to.
And you're having a town hall this evening?
Yeah, we're doing a town hall this evening with the governor, former governor of Ohio, Republican, and myself, a senator, Democrat, and also I hope Arnold Schwarzenegger, a Republican governor of California. I hope he comes aboard tomorrow. I think we'll have another one with some well-known personalities from arts and entertainment. We'll see where we go.
So they can find all that anyway on the website.
They'll find it on the website, worldwarzero.com.
Brilliant. No, thanks very much, Secretary. It was brilliant to chat.
Alicia, thank you for your efforts. You've been a star at this. I love what you're doing. Keep it up, please.
Absolutely. It was great. Thanks very much.
Take care.